Okay, hello. Welcome to EEP Africa Knowledge Week. This is our first event of 3 days worth of webinars, sharing some insights and lessons learned from our portfolio of clean energy projects in Southern and East Africa. And the session today, the theme is Clean Energy for Climate Resilience. My name is Tracy Dolan. I'm with the EEP Africa team, and joining me is Chiedza Mazawana, who will also be a moderator. Let me start with just a few words about EEP Africa. EEP Africa is a clean energy financing facility. We provide grants and loans to small companies, startup companies in Southern and East Africa that are piloting and demonstrating new technologies and business models. In addition to the financing, we provide investment facilitation and business development support, and we also focus on knowledge, policy, and partnerships. And this event is part of our knowledge promotion and our knowledge networking. Our focus countries are in Southern and East Africa. We support projects in 15 countries across the region, and some projects are regional where they operate in more than one country. We are technology agnostic, and so our portfolio is extremely diverse. We support companies in a wide variety of clean energy technologies and a wide variety of business models, and focusing on piloting new solutions, energy solutions, or piloting new distribution and sales models, or piloting new financial inclusion and access to financing projects. The theme of this seminar comes from a new report that we have just launched. It's hot off the digital presses and can be found in the handout section of this webinar. If you go to the side, you'll see a place for handouts, and I should mention you'll also see a place for questions. You can put your questions there, and our moderators will take a look later and direct them to our panelists. But the new report is there in the handouts. This is called Energizing Resilience, Climate Co-Benefits from Clean Energy Projects, and it focuses on the climate adaptation and resilience co-benefits that are generated from projects such as those supported by EEP Africa. As I said, we have a very diverse portfolio, and so you can see there the list of the different types of projects that were looked at in the analysis and research for this report. And from this analysis, we found that clean energy projects had the potential to contribute to a wide variety, almost all adaptation and resilience themes. But there were two themes that really stuck out and that had clear demonstrated benefits happening in the field. And those are agricultural resilience and local self-reliance. And as you can see here, some of the variety of uses of clean energy in each of those sectors. In agricultural resilience, you have energy use throughout the value chain, from irrigation to cold storage, agricultural processing such as milling or drying, milling or other processing, sorry, heating and cooking for farms and households, transportation to market, and electricity for marketplaces. And this is increasing the yields and the income for smallholder farmers. It's reducing pressure on ecosystems, and it's producing byproducts such as organic fertilizers. In local self-reliance, you have a number of clean energy uses that are supporting households, schools and health clinics, small businesses and entrepreneurs, and a variety of transport infrastructure and emergency response services from municipalities. This is also opening increased income and job opportunities. It's improving health and education, reducing pressure on the ecosystems, and enhancing local capacity. And as we've seen in the past few months dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, having local resources and local capacity has become increasingly important when there are disruptions in value chains or limitations on travel and movement of goods and people, like we've seen this year. In the case study, in the report, we talk about several case studies from the EEP Africa portfolio. In agricultural resilience, we do a deep dive into 3 projects: Sun Culture in East Africa, which works in the field of solar irrigation and pumping. Inspira Farms, which works on cold storage, Sistema Bio, which is producing biogas from biodigesters. And then in terms of local self-reliance, we have case studies on a mini grid in Tanzania installed by Ensol, a local company. We have a case study on Acacia Innovations, which is helping promote cleaner cooking through solid biomass, and Off-Grid Box, which is installing modular and portable energy hubs in rural areas in Rwanda. So that's a little introduction to the EEP Africa and the report that we have just launched. And now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Chiedza, who will introduce our panelists and begin the session.
Thanks, Tracy, and a warm welcome again to our participants. We are delighted that you have joined us today for this webinar from different parts of the world. And now to have an idea of which geographical areas are represented, we are putting out a poll. Please participate by indicating which region you've dialed in from. The poll should be coming up now. Yes, it has come up. So please just indicate which region that you have dialed in from. And as you are doing that, allow me to introduce our esteemed panel that will share their insights on clean energy for climate resilience. So first of all, we have Julia Larkin. Julia is a managing director for Ideas for Energy. She specializes in evaluating multilateral energy and climate finance programs, especially those that promote local markets for renewable energy, energy access, and energy efficiency in developing countries. In the past 30 years, she has been involved in dozens of evaluations using both qualitative and quantitative data. And in addition, she has worked directly on design of technical projects. She has led implementation of programs. She has drafted monitoring and reporting protocols, as well as provided strategic sustainability consulting. She holds a Master of Public Policy from University of California, Berkeley. And Julia is the one who also conducted the research and analysis for EEP Africa's study on energizing resilience that Tracy has just mentioned. And next, we have Isabel Leroux. Isabel is a program manager at the Nordic Development Fund, where her focus is on NDF's private sector financing activities in climate adaptation and resilience. So sorry, we have a little typo there on our presentation. Isabel has led and managed key NDF initiatives in private sector resilience, including the launch of the first global private equity fund focusing on climate resilience technologies and solutions, the Lightsmith Climate Resilience Partners, and the publication of the Private Markets for Climate Resilience, which is a study that focuses on how climate resilience solutions provided by the private sector are addressing climate risks in the agriculture and transportation sector in selected developing countries. Prior to joining NDF, Isabel worked in various positions at FinFund, which is the development finance institution that is owned by the government of Finland. And last but not least, we have Dr. Rebekah Shirley. Rebekah is the Chief of Research at Power for All, where she works to create widespread public access to energy data and insights. Rebekah explores integrated electrification opportunities for Africa and the Caribbean, and previously conducted research in Southeast Asia. For this work, Rebekah was shortlisted as a GWEC Revolutionary in 2020, featured as an ESI Africa Power and Energy Leader in 2019, and she was named Africa Utility Week's Outstanding Young Leader in Energy in 2018. Rebekah obtained her PhD in energy resources from the University of California, Berkeley, where she was a Chancellor's Fellow. So welcome, ladies. And before we get into our discussion, let's see our poll results. Can we have our poll results pulled out? Okay, so we have a huge representation from Europe. Welcome to the team in East Africa and Southern Africa, as well as West Africa. And we have another section termed others. But everyone, we're delighted to have you on board. So as we move on and start off our discussion, Julia, you conducted the research and analysis for EEP Africa's new report on core benefits. What did you find most interesting or surprising about the relationship between clean energy projects and efforts to address climate change? Julia, you're on mute. Please unmute.
There you go. Hello, everyone. Thank you. So what did I find most interesting or surprising about this report? I would have to say the first thing was how little practical information there actually is on the linkages at the project level. There's a lot of information that's very, abstract, and we should look at the nexus and speaking at the policy level. But I was really quite surprised at how little information there is at okay, what projects are delivering what type of benefits, what's working, what's not working on the ground, which of course leads me to believe that these linkages should be examined more systematically because the need is just too great, right? To waste the opportunity to make sure that we're we're exploring the linkages and capturing the synergies that are there. And then the other thing I guess was impressed by was that developers are already naturally evolving towards projects with increased co-benefits as they explore, more viable business models, how to expand their business. They're really looking at, okay, what are the local needs? And they may not be using the words adaptation, resilience. In fact, they probably aren't. They're probably using much more business, customer-oriented language. But what they're actually doing is naturally picking these things up. And in some cases, developers are even starting to consciously market their solutions using the sort of adaptation and resilience terminology, such as relocating energy supply to lower risk areas, or protecting and replenishing forest resources. So, I mean, there's much more I could say, but I think I'll stop there and pick anything else up on questions later.
Great, thank you very much, Julia. Next, I'd like to ask Isabel, and apologies for that typo on the presentation earlier, but Isabel from the Nordic Development Fund. Isabel, the NDF and several partners published a global report earlier this year on private markets for climate resilience. In what ways do the EEP Africa report findings support or contradict or align with the findings from that global report?
Thank you, and hello to everybody. It's great to be part of this event. And well, on a general level, I'm really happy to say that the private markets for climate resilience study that we published earlier this year is very well aligned with the EEP co-benefits report. And I think that just not to go too much into detail, but the main objective of the private markets for climate resilience report was to really look at the private sector, what the private sector in selected developing countries, of which in Africa were South Africa and Kenya, what is the private sector already doing in the context of climate resilience? So kind of like the underlying assumption is the huge amount of capital that is needed to be mobilized to developing countries to tackle the negative climate impacts of that are happening due to climate change. And given the fact that really public action alone is not sufficient, so there is need, and that much of the costs really of climate change will be borne by the private sector and by communities and economies, is that the private sector has a really important role in scaling solutions and products and technologies to tackle. But in addition to that, there is an actual business opportunity for the private sector in developing new market segments and new so to say, new economic returns to both to companies, but also to financiers and investors. So if I can, I will actually take on the comment that Julia just presented, and it's actually one of the main findings that we had in our study also, is that there are hundreds of products and services that are already being supplied by the private sector, but the private sector, not companies or customers, are not calling them adaptation or resilience solutions. So, but much of the when we went, and this is something that was very well aligned also between the PMCR study and the EEP study, is that value chain perspective. So we looked at the value chain of selected crops in the agricultural sector and identified different climate impacts and risks in different stages of these value chains. And what are the products that are being there supplied that build resilience in these value chains? And I'm so happy to see that these are many of the solutions that have also been identified in the EEP project, in the EEP study. So these are much linked to irrigation, water management, storage, and transportation, and post-harvest crop management, and so on. So we do see that those linkages between clean energy, energy efficiency, which are closely linked to avoiding disruptions, but also adapting to the impact of a changing climate. So we do see that these co-benefits are very much part, and I would say an intrinsic part of building resilience in developing countries, and particularly as I'm talking about the agricultural sector. And one thing that I still want to point out, that where there's a strong alignment, is the importance of taking into account the local context. So while there are solutions and there are products that can build, for example, in clean energy, that have these can build resilience also through their co-benefits, is that one solution will not solve all the problems everywhere. So we really need to look at the specific context and what are the risks and the impacts in the medium term and the long term, and finding the best solutions there. And I think that we ended one of the main conclusions of our PMCR report is that there is already a large and vast amount of investment opportunities for financiers and investors. So those investments they're ready to be scaled and replicated. So it's a very positive, the situation is very positive. So now it's just about really sharing those stories and increasing that awareness and taking that holistic approach that's really being promoted by the EEP study of, well, not just all it's about project developers, investors, financiers, donors, but also regulators and local governments and local institutions and so on. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Isabel. And those are quite interesting insights, because as a whole energy access ecosystem, each and every piece of the puzzle has a role to play. And it's important for everyone to collaborate and come together in order to build climate resilient value chains. Now, to you, Rebekah, with most African countries being agro-based economies, our agricultural producers want products and services that are not only short-term, but will enable them to build climate resilient value chains. And with these changes in climate, which have drastic impacts on food security in many countries, particularly the developing countries, which have limited capacity to respond, what do you see as the role of clean energy in play? What does the role of clean energy entail in addressing food insecurity in sub-Saharan Africa? And can you also highlight the gender aspects of these impacts?
Yes, definitely. Thanks so much, Chiedza, and thank you, EEP, for having me. And indeed, yes, Sub-Saharan Africa is one of the regions most severely affected by climate change, as most of the population is dependent on climate-sensitive economies or economic activities, like Chiedza just said, such as agriculture. And according to the EU, the most direct and well-researched effect of climate change on food security in Africa is food availability through reduced net crop production. So I'm sure you're all reading in the news of the locust swarms and the extreme flooding that we're seeing here in parts of Kenya, as well as our neighbors Ethiopia and Rwanda. We're in November and it's still raining here in Kenya, and the flooding in the lake regions is indeed very challenging. And I should just say very briefly that there are already early indications that the direct and indirect effects of COVID are exacerbating that challenge due to the limited supplies of imported inputs like fertilizers, pesticides, and so on, extension services, the movement of farm labor, and of course the disruption of distribution chains, which are highly sensitive to disruption given the pronounced lack of things like proper cold storage or collection centers for perishable produce. So all of that to say, yes, that it's a challenge, and it's led institutions like the World Food Programme to project that the number of people who are food insecure in East Africa alone could double or more just in 2020. Now, while emergency support is critical in the short term, we're seeing a lot of attention now on the longer term solutions for local and regional food system resilience, as Chiedza was saying. So energy technologies for heating, energy technologies for cooling, for electricity to power motors are all a part of that infrastructure that's needed to grow resiliency. I'll say just one more thing on that. Investment in power infrastructure, it's not the only barrier, but it is indeed a vital barrier to unlock this productivity. Just as a quick reference, you can imagine that right now agriculture is the continent's most important sector, but yet it's accounting for less than 2% of all energy consumption across the entire continent. And so we're seeing more companies now that are specialized in providing solar irrigation, solar cold storage, solar cold transportation, all becoming more common. These are all case studies in the EEP report. And in addition, a new wave of renewable energy powered agricultural processing, small and medium-sized enterprises are emerging. We're seeing everything from fruit drying, fish drying, milling, oil pressing, egg incubation, honey processing, and more. That's all, supporting food security, but also creating or evolving livelihood opportunities. And Chiedza, just to answer your last question on gender impacts, on this note about livelihood opportunities, I just want to point out that the literature does suggest that a lot of the livelihood creation from agri-energy interventions is happening in rural areas. And this is important because women and youth are, of course, the hardest impacted by the dearth of rural employment opportunities due to complex and compounding challenges, of course, around access to education, training, traditional perceptions of gender roles, and so on. So leveraging the opportunities that sit here at this agriculture energy nexus, particularly for women and youth, is really important as the renewable energy sector continues to grow rapidly and support agriculture.
Yeah, and also I guess that speaks to the study on powering jobs as well, conducted by Power for All. The opportunity that exists in improving livelihoods, but also creating resilient solutions for smallholder farmers within, sub-Saharan Africa. And now for us to turn our attention to the audience, we're also going to bring out another poll in which we're going to ask our audience to participate. In which area do you think clean energy has the greatest impact in terms of climate resilience? Is it in irrigation and water pumping, Is it chilling and cold storage? Is it processing, or is it in clean cooking? Please just participate, go on to the poll and put out your thoughts on which area you think clean energy has the greatest impact in terms of climate resilience. As we have the poll, we can get the results a bit later on. Maybe Tracy, we can move on to the next question.
Yes, great, thank you. Okay, so there we go. So irrigation and water pumping seems to win by a mile there, and clean cooking comes next. That's very interesting. Chilling and cold storage, only 7%. However, I believe in the EEP Africa report, it found that that particular sector is growing significantly in recent years with a diversity of different solutions that are addressing all different stages and levels of chilling and storage, cold storage that are needed. So it'd be interesting to see if that is still only 7% in a year or two from now. Okay. We can go on and continue our discussion. This would be a question maybe for all of the panelists. Both the EEP Africa report and the NDF report focus on private sector-led development specifically. Sometimes clean energy has been seen as a pure development issue, the realm of NGOs and civil society organizations, but increasingly it is being driven by the private sector. In what ways can companies, what benefits and challenges do companies have addressing these issues? And how can companies work better with other stakeholders in the sector, government officials, as well as NGOs, to address the issue and address the co-benefits of adaptation and resilience? Maybe Julia, you could start.
I just needed to push all the right buttons there. Thank you, Tracy. So actually, Rebekah touched upon this from a different angle already, but the first thing that I would say is that the more that private sector developers can link their proposal, their proposed projects to broader needs and initiatives that the local governments and funders and other stakeholders are aware of, and use that language, that their terminology, like speak both their business language, but also the, the other language of policy and or local governments, depending on the context, the more traction that we'll get. Because I think the report that Isabel was discussing also picked up on this quite a bit, and she referred to it, but these groups are often talking about very similar things, but the language is so different that it's just hard for people to relate to each other, that they're talking about the same thing. And so fortunately or unfortunately, I think some more work needs to be done in terms of understanding how to frame what you're talking about in a way that your audience understands. And that goes for everyone in the group. That's not just private developers, that's everyone, but that includes private developers. And also really recognizing that we're still figuring out what works and doesn't work in specific contexts, and early stage support, like EEP Africa offers, is definitely still needed, particularly to refine business models and test concepts. And it is still a development issue, but it is not only a development issue. And I think I'm just sort of looking at my notes here, because I think we covered a lot already. I think I'll stop there. I know Rebekah will have a lot to add on this topic as well.
Yeah, and actually, maybe I can turn it to Isabel first, because a question also came in while you were speaking, Julia, and a question from the audience that specifically mentioned that Isabel mentioned a holistic approach to climate change, value chains. So Isabel, maybe you could expand more about what is the role of local businesses, entrepreneurs, and learning? Where do they come in the value chain?
Sure, thank you. Hopefully I understand the question correctly. But of course, there's a lot of capacity building and awareness. But also I want to pinpoint that what Julia also mentioned is about the language that is used. So firstly, just talking about, as and it was earlier also mentioned, that many of the things that actually do have a resilience perspective or content are not spoken as being resilience. So it's kind of that, and it's a lot of the also one of the main lessons from our study was that really there is that lack of awareness and also the lack of tools to assess uncertainties and risks related to climate change and to impacts. So it's of course looking at that whole value chain of what are the different players, are the small, for example, the agricultural value chain, smallholders, and then of course, for example, institutions that deal with smallholders that will give training and capacity building, but also financing. So access to finance is key, and of course the institutions that are providing that finance need to also understand and be aware. And then of course as we go along the value chain, then there come different actors and service providers and so on. So so that's basically the holistic approach is exactly that, building that understanding and awareness, and of course having them those tools and those capacities to deal with those climate impacts and risks along the value chain. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for that. And Rebekah, do you have, could you add also from the Power for All perspective on this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really important conversation that we're having, because a lot of the argument for energy and agriculture opportunities right now is being forwarded by the energy sector, or the supply side, as some call it, partly because there is a symbiosis opportunity. So a lot of the energy, especially the decentralized energy service providers themselves, like mini grids and so on, equally benefit from agro-processing demand through increased revenues, thereby in theory improving affordability for their end users and supporting their business models as well. But each of these agri-food value chains is very complex and specialized in terms of equipment and logistics, and also in terms of supply chain and the players and the incumbents. So I think that expecting mini grid developers or mini grid asset managers rather to design bespoke tailored solutions for each value chain is a very tall order. So all of that to say that I think really if demand is coming from the value chains, the agri-food systems within themselves, and the climate resilience community itself, that would actually lead to, I think, more sustainable opportunities for partnership. And the last thing I would just say is that there is really, both from our experience running the Powering Agriculture campaign and from the literature, a lot of opportunity for public-private sector stakeholder partnerships, which can help to leverage all of the job opportunity and food security and demand stimulation potential of the sector. So I think that if we saw donors and the development agencies and the international NGOs coordinating more closely together and integrating agri-food and energy technologies into their medium and long-term strategies to combat food security issues, I think that would also help. And I think that partnership could look like so many things. It might be task forces like the one that we're helping to run in Uganda, or it could be results-based financing schemes, or demand-side subsidies, or challenge funds, or even just public-private consultative groups. So all of that to say that there is definitely a need for decision makers to sort of get out of the silos of energy, agriculture, climate, and really begin collaborating around the solutions.
Thank you, Rebekah. And to add on to that, I think there is a lot of learning that also can be shared from experiences in countries like Sierra Leone, where these task forces have been implemented and are working. We've got examples from Zambia even. So a way in which all that information and insights can be shared across the different markets to enhance the coordination and collaboration amongst the different stakeholders would be critical. And now in the face of this global pandemic, which is COVID-19, what impact have you seen on clean energy, on the clean energy sector, and what implications does the pandemic have for the climate adaptation and resilience? Maybe we can start off with Julia.
Okay, so first of all, it's absolutely having a huge impact, right? You know, the specific examples, which we've already touched on a bit previously, but are, you know, the inability for the teams to travel, you know, within countries, between countries. Basically, you know, if they can't get to the project sites, they can't necessarily interact directly one-on-one with their clients and customers. There are delays in procurement, you know, issues, you know, all along the supply chain, and it's unpredictable, and it's uneven as well in terms of what areas are experiencing more impact than others and when. And then there are also, you know, tremendous financial issues. For example, customers, you know, no longer being able to pay what they had been paying, investors canceling or delaying funds. So there also seem to be phases of this, right? You know, sort of the first stage is more of like a pause, and then for different organizations and places, it moves to the next stage more or less quickly about, okay, now what are we going to do about this, right? You know, how are we going to be creative and get past this? And I think that's the real underlying story here, is that while this has had a huge impact, you're also seeing tremendous creativity in developers seeking solutions. You know, okay, this is a situation, you know, how are we going to survive? How can we continue to help our customers, you know, et cetera. And so some of the changes that, for example, EEP Africa did a survey of its developers, and you know, some of the changes are, you know, are temporary and will end, but we're also seeing examples of sort of long-term changes, like internal changes within their teams, where they're able to do more remotely instead of where they had assumed in-person, say, training, for example, before. Well, that then allows, you know, the team in you know, Kenya to talk to the team in Thailand now. And so we're also seeing examples of sort of this broader linkage and collaboration. And you certainly lose something in person, but you also can gain something by your reach. And this will really facilitate, you know, scaling up. And then also a lot of creativity around financing and you know, payment solutions for customers, and also expanding their customer base either sooner than they were planning on, or just a new customer base that they hadn't thought of before, to try to make sure that they achieve critical mass. I think I'll stop there. So could go on with many examples.
Thank you, Julia. And Isabel, from your experience and what you've seen, what are the impacts of the global pandemic on the companies and on climate resilience?
Thank you very much. I think that just on not as much as looking at companies, but more on the larger scale, when we look at climate, the impacts of climate change from the perspective of vulnerability and fragility, while we are dealing with climate resilience and adaptation, the fact that these are closely linked to general resilience, and the truth is that when we have these when there's high climate vulnerability and fragility, and systems are not resilient to climate impacts, the fact that then when you have additional negative impacts, or as the COVID pandemic, for example, it just shows that communities and systems and societies that are not resilient will just be even more vulnerable. So I think that in that sense, it just brings again to the attention the importance of strengthening resilience and really the adaptation capacity and absorption capacity of societies, communities, and systems of these risks, that one impact on top of that impact can be increasingly detrimental to communities and society. So I think that that's just that there is that shift in the perspective, and seeing the interlinkages of all of these different aspects that are linked to resilience beyond climate change. Thank you.
Thanks, Isabel. And finally, Rebekah, if you can have a brief overview of that issue.
Definitely. So we're not developers ourselves, but we have been continually checking the pulse and synthesizing all of the reports on COVID and decentralized renewable energy technologies and companies. We just put out a newsletter entirely on COVID, I think last month or the month before, that people can find on the website if this is interesting. Let me answer your question, Shirley, from 2 points of view, from the customer side and the company side. So on the customer side, it's difficult to assess the impact so far. There are early signs from the data that is coming out, like for instance, Cross Boundary just did a recent insight on this, that revenues are declining, but it's not yet clear whether this decline in revenues from customers is outside of the standard range of variability that we would see year on year for decentralized renewables. That said, other reports, and you can all check out the 60 decibels dashboard that focuses specifically on consumer impacts, which suggests that actually customers' ability to pay is being significantly affected. So we still need a bit more data to really understand on the customer side. On the company side, as Julia mentioned, companies are definitely significantly challenged by liquidity. So as customer sales go down, access to capital slows down or is reduced, and the pandemic is also, of course, causing challenges and disruptions to global supply chains, which themselves are causing infrastructure hikes. And all of this is happening while overhead costs and staff costs are staying the same, right? So I think it puts the companies themselves, a lot of these are our own partners, are really challenged right now. So I think bridge loans, operating capital grants are all needed to tide over these times. And there are a number of relief funds that have emerged to support the sector, but I think the consensus is generally, as Isabel said, that more support is still needed. Two things. One, AMDA has already shown in their latest report that a significant number of the funds, or proportion of the funds rather, that are meant to be dispersed to DRE companies even before COVID are caught in various stages of the pipeline. So really working on those issues of getting funds dispersed that are already committed to companies is critical. But also what we're seeing is an interesting trend that a lot of these relief funds are being directed to foreign companies rather than local companies. And I think that that's another issue that needs to be addressed if we're really serious about supporting the sector through the pandemic.
Thanks, Rebekah, for those interesting insights. And surprisingly, also, I agree that we actually need more insights and data to have concrete evidence on the actual effects. Because when you speak to other companies, I guess also depending on the size of the company, some companies are actually testifying that this is their best year ever, and they have made the most sales during this COVID time. But also an interesting aspect you've brought about on who are the relief funds being targeted to, foreign versus local. And the other question would be, are they coming in time to give the relief that they are supposed to give to the companies? And to round off our discussion, I have one last question for our panelists. And just in one sentence, please just indicate the advice that you would give to investors to improve the climate funding landscape, given that most climate funding has traditionally gone towards mitigation efforts. And while this has core benefits for adaptation and resilience, the EEP Africa study highlights that it is not sufficient to address climate needs. So probably in just one sentence, what would you give as advice to investors to improve the climate funding landscape? Isabel, we'll start with you. and then Rebekah, and lastly, Julia.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I guess it's just this, increasing the, again, I'm repeating myself, but increasing the awareness of investors. So it's kind of like shifting that view that the mitigation and adaptation and resilience are separate, so to say, separate categories, and you can do just either one of them. So it's kind of that an understanding that there is value, and that they're actually in addition to supporting companies and enhancing resilience, that there is actually that business value that can come from sustainable economic systems. So kind of and that it translates to positive returns to investors. So it's kind of like understanding what's that kind of like that cause and consequence of those kind of investments. Thank you.
It's a good question, Chedza, and I would say that I think what we're seeing from this conversation is that all of these topics that we're talking about, food security, energy access, jobs creation, and climate resilience, are all inherently connected, and they're sort of different sides of the very same coin. And I think that one of the challenges is that a lot of companies in the energy access and ag space and so on, they're not sort of incentivized to be tracking and understanding those linkages. And investors are in the perfect place to encourage and to incentivize companies and nonprofits and so on to actually understand these linkages better, to put more data into the space that will help us to understand the direct impact on climate resilience, and also understand how we can encourage better models for development of solutions that have climate impacts.
Great, thanks, Rebekah. And Julia? Yes.
I'm not going to repeat the excellent things both of the others have said, only to say that, the time of siloed thinking has passed. And so even if you're focusing on a particular angle such as clean energy, you need to think in terms of multifaceted sustainable development. And, as Rebekah was pointing out, you need to track what you're doing and share out your thinking and your learning, so we can all move forward together. Thank you.
Great, thank you to all our panelists for those insightful comments on some of the issues that are addressed in the EEP Africa report. It's now time for audience question and answer. We have a few minutes left. If anyone would like to type a question into their chat box, they can. And we have one question that I think is very interesting that's come in already about the production of biofuel energy. So sustainable production of biofuels. And I know that this is an issue that's highlighted in the EEP Africa report in terms of biofuels for cleaner cooking and biofuels for transportation. And both sectors still have low market penetration in Africa so far, but have the potential to have a really dramatic effect on climate and on development in the region. Isabel, I think transportation was one of the areas of focus of the NDF report as well. Would you like to comment on that?
Thank you very much. Actually, we did not specifically look at biofuels in the transportation sector. So I would leave to Julia and Rebekah to answer to this question. I'm sure they have more insights.
Okay, sure. Julia, do you want to take that first?
Well, first, I would say you have to be very careful how you're sourcing your biofuels, right? For sustainability, you don't want to, grow things to then process them. You want to be really using waste products. But on the other hand, we are seeing, very innovative examples of, whether it's waste oils from, restaurants or, various other substrates. There's one project, for example, that's using a combination of sewage waste and very difficult to process plant waste that most other biofuel processing plants can't handle together. And then that's not only producing energy for the community, but that's also producing fertilizer, organic fertilizer that they can then sell on a local market.
Great, thank you. Rebekah, do you want to add anything to that, or?
Just one quick thing, that we actually just this year did a study on exactly this topic of biofuels from the cooking perspective, and we're looking at livelihood creation opportunities coming from bioethanol, biogas. We looked at a couple of other fuels, LPG and e-cooking, and we generally were finding that although, as the commenter said, these are still fairly nascent sectors, there are quite a number of direct, formal, and informal jobs already coming from sectors like biogas and bioethanol. 700, I think, was the number of jobs from the bioethanol sector in Kenya, and another 900 from biogas. And these are largely in rural communities, which of course is an important value add. So I think there's wide opportunities to affect climate resilience, which was interesting. And in your poll, it came second, but also a major opportunity here to have an employment impact.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for that comment. We have another question from the audience. So I'm not sure who from the panel might like to take this. The question is about what are the key challenges in the use of renewable energy, especially solar, in the agri-food value chain? So are the key challenges more in terms of the technology or the business case? Is it access to financing for customers or developing partnerships on the ground? Julia, do you want to take a crack at that one?
Well, I don't know that I have a comprehensive sense of every angle of that, but I will say my understanding is that a huge barrier is sufficient market on the ground to, like if there is very little storage and cold chain and processing capacity now, then there's very little money that those farmers are earning to then support some new investment, right? So there needs to be a critical mass of market before you can then grow. And so that's what I'm hearing, at least from the projects that I was interacting with. That's one of the huge barriers, is doing that dance of getting the appropriate local solution, established enough that it can then build upon itself.
Okay, great. Isabel or Rebekah, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. I would add that on the large-scale renewable side or large-scale energy side, one of the big challenges that we see, for instance, in Uganda, is around reliability and tariffs or connection costs. So it's very expensive, even where you do have energy access. That doesn't sort of magically make agriculture and agro-productivity easier. So because of these types of challenges. And then on the off-grid or the decentralized renewable energy side, as you were saying, there's a very big difference between the addressable market, meaning the theoretical market that is able to absorb a service like power or powered appliances, and the serviceable market, meaning that portion of the market that can actually pay for the service. So according to the IFC, they put out a paper last year that showed that between solar cooling, refrigeration, and so on, these types of technologies, solar-powered technologies, have an addressable market of over US 11 billion, but the serviceable market is barely 200 million because of affordability challenges, which is exactly what Julia was saying. So to add to the comment that we made before about what investors can do, finance is needed on the company side, but of course, consumer finance to address the affordability challenge is a major opportunity as well.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for adding that comment. The EEP Africa report and the EEP Africa portfolio, which you can see all the projects supported by the fund at the moment on our website, actually has a number of financial inclusion projects where we're looking specifically at access to financing for customers and consumers so that they are able to afford to purchase productive use equipment and energy efficient appliances and utilize the clean energy that is coming to their region from these different sources. And I think that's a big issue also in terms of addressing some of the reaching the bottom of the pyramid and reaching women and youth and other marginalized communities in the region. So thank you very much to all of our panelists. I think that we are now out of time. We only had an hour for this session, but there was a lot more we could have discussed. Very interesting thoughts on partnerships and financing, on the development of technology and how that is being used on the ground, as well as the development of new business models. I do encourage everyone to look to the side of their screen for the handouts where you can access the EEP Africa report, Energizing Resilience, and also the NDF report on private markets for climate resilience. I would also encourage everybody to please tune in for the next 2 webinars in our EEP Africa Knowledge Week. Tomorrow we have a session on expanding productive use, lessons from the field, and we will have actually 5 companies that are currently being supported by EEP Africa who are working in the field in terms of irrigation and waste to energy and other key issues, and financing, and actually access to financing. So please tune in to that session tomorrow. And on Thursday, we have our final session where we will be announcing the project of the year for EEP Africa. We also have the Finnish ambassador for climate change will be joining us and speaking about the importance of climate diplomacy and the role of clean energy in climate. And then we're going to have a roundtable of our rising energy leaders. This is a new award launched by EEP Africa this year, which is our 10th year of operation. So it's our 10th anniversary. And we have selected a group of really dynamic emerging leaders in the sector who are working in Africa in the clean energy sector. They are listed on our website. If you go there, you'll see them. But we will have a roundtable with our 5 rising energy leaders to talk about opportunities for entrepreneurs, innovators, and others in the field of clean energy. So please do sign up for those on our website. And you can also go, as I said, find out more information about our current projects, past projects, and find all of our publications, including Energizing Resilience. And last year, we actually published a report on productive use of energy. So you can find that there also. So thank you very much for your time. Chiedza and Julia, Isabel and Rebekah, thank you very much for all participating. And we hope that you have a wonderful evening.